basically wanted to be able to join. A number of people wanted to be able to join, and unfortunately, timing, of course, being what it is, it's tricky for everyone to be able to make this sort of thing. So, this is first of all, I'd say welcome everybody. We're going to see how well we can see how well this works. For those who aren't aware, this is sort of the first attempt we have at this. So this is our first look at trying to do better with our extension and outreach towards all the folks that we host websites for and work with. And do a little bit more to really offer more in terms of what we can do with the web community and what we do with doing what we do to help you guys be able to publish and kind of move things forward in that sort of way. I think that, for the most part, we'll have to see how well this works. I'm interested to see what everyone thinks of the format. I think there's a multitude of ways we could sort of address this sort of thing. Doing this via Zoom is sort of one of the ways. We want to make sure there was sort of an open format for everyone to be able to potentially chime in, ask questions, that sort of thing. But one thing that we'll be definitely interested to get your feedback on as this goes is whether or not this worked well, or whether or not you'd rather just have this be in like a streamed, video on demand sort of format where you can just sort of watch it later. Something like that. Either way works. But we're really interested to see what works well for everyone else. So as we move forward here, we'll definitely be curious to get your thoughts. So with that, sort of today, we just want to be able to spend kind of roughly the hour. We're going to leave some wiggle room in there because I really don't know how much, questions and other conversation might come up. So we'll see where that goes. I definitely want to be very respectful of everyone's time though. So we will make sure we definitely end on time. And if anyone has any additional thoughts and questions that sort of extend beyond that, we are definitely gonna make sure we have multiple ways for you to reach out to us, and we can talk about that further. So with that, we'll have some introductions, talk about sort of where we're going with things, the general news and updates we have right now, and then a little bit of a demo preview about where things are starting to move in terms of the editor, which some of you will find familiar because a few of you are already using it, and then for others this might be pretty new. So we'll see where that goes from there. So with that, I'll just sort of mention it for those of you who don't know me, which I don't know who wouldn't in this room at this point. I don't know. My name's Al, and basically I act as the web operations manager with CALS IT. So I'll pass it to Mark here as well, if you'd like to jump in and introduce himself.
Yeah, thanks, Al. And I'm Mark Millard, the web services developer. Might be new to some of you, so I'm somewhat new in the role, although it's now been a little bit over a year, which is hard to believe. So, but it's great to be working with Al and on the web services team.
So I think what we ought to do here, I mean, especially with everyone else, how many people do we have in the room? I have a hard time seeing with them present mode. I should actually double check that before we get started.
About 15 total, looks like.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone else wants to jump in and introduce themselves. I know there's a lot of faces in here that have a wide range of expertise. So if anyone's interested in doing so, we can do that. Otherwise, we'll move along and see where we land at the end of this. So why don't we jump into? Why don't we just jump into the services overview? We want to go through that, Mark, and then we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So we just wanted to kind of give, we've got a lot of new site users and a lot of new websites. Well, before I got here, Al did a major lift and moved all of the Russell websites over to our platform. So we kind of thought it would be a good idea just to give an overview of, kind of what we're responsible for, what we maintain. So on a kind of a daily basis. So our CALS web WordPress platform, we just kind of looked this morning. We have about 275 websites, and then some other custom web applications that we maintain and support. That includes about 200 WordPress plugins of various. So not all sites use all plugins, but that's kind of the total. And then we have about 450 or so site admins and editors that we support on our CALS platform. So that kind of gives a scope of all that, and that includes all the department websites, research centers, ag stations, Russell. So that keeps us, pretty busy. We also provide web design, web accessibility, user experience advocacy, through our documentation, through the theme that we provide. Since there's only two of us, we also are able to do some direct consultation when we do have time. So if you're ever interested in any of that, definitely reach out to us, and we can kind of see what we can do. But we try to do that through the theme, through the platform. So when we're developing themes, plugins, enhancements to the editing interface, we of course we pull from web design best practices, web accessibility. We're constantly refining and improving. So as you use any of these, please, we want to just open up that line, that invitation to send us requests, send us, your wish list, because we want to make sure that we're incorporating that as we make updates. Kind of mentioned the maintaining the theme, the CALS theme, custom plugins, site editing. We also assist Do It, who kind of handles the main AWS server infrastructure. We definitely assist with that. We assist our CALS cybersecurity with with site security, updating all the plugins, making sure things are secure and up and fast, as fast as we can get it. And we're constantly trying to improve that. And then we also do some special web development design projects as well. So that's just kind of an overview of what kind of keeps Al and I busy on a day-to-day. So I want to just zero in on a recent initiative that we've done, sort of support initiative. So this summer, I think it was in August, we sent out a CALS web community survey. So just want to thank those of you who completed that. We really appreciate the time that you took to give us your feedback. So that feedback definitely helped inform us. We obviously had some plans, some ideas in the works, but that helped inform and prioritize what our community, what you guys thought was important. So it informed what we were doing well and areas that we can improve. So that was extremely helpful, obviously. Areas to expand our support and training. This new webinar format being one of them. That was sort of an interest that a lot of folks mentioned. Also expanding and updating our documentation. So in addition to Whisk's Web, which is the sort of campus WordPress platform, they have documentation. We also have our own documentation. There's a lot of similarities, but there are some differences. So we definitely are going to make an effort to expand and update our current documentation. And then also just, again, prioritizing the WordPress features and web services that we're offering. Now, Al later is going to talk about a lot of the work he's been doing on developing the new block editor and making it, in my opinion, awesome. Like what he's been doing is just so cool. So that's kind of the user survey and what we learned from that, and then just kind of wanted to give highlight our web hosting, basically our website, webhosting.cals.whisk. So there, it's kind of a one-stop shop. You can access our documentation links, our support form. If you need a reminder of our support email, all of that information is there. We're going to make an effort to as well. This needs a little bit of updating. We're going to start working on that. This will have, like, for example, information links to this regularly occurring webinar as well. So kind of bookmark that in your mind there. And then on the next slide, I just wanted to thanks, Al. Just kind of mention like what this thing is. So this is as Al mentioned, our first web community webinar. So the why of it was a desire for more regular communication updates and training opportunities on WordPress. One thing that we learned in the survey, which does make sense, but a lot of folks, unlike Al and I, who are in there every single day working on WordPress, doing things, a lot of folks are only in there about once a week to once a month to even a few times a semester, right? Because depending on their site, the content isn't always updating. So I think it's very easy, right? If you're not in something a lot, it's easy to kind of forget how something works. So this is one of the opportunities that we identified that could sort of hopefully bridge the gap in sort of supporting the users as they learn new things, as they want to do new things with their site. They can bring their ideas to us, but also just sort of a touch point to kind of keep a regular reminder of like, oh yeah, Al and Mark are there to support me, right? I can reach out to them whenever I want, and I can also attend these webinars. So in terms of the when, what we're looking at is about every 2 months. That was kind of the feel we got from the user survey. So we're going to try that schedule. So we're planning to have this one, and then so the next one will be sometime in November, and we'll communicate the time and day specifically. But again, what these are. So that's a bit of an open question. We're definitely open to feedback. But definitely at the core, it's going to be an opportunity for training and demos, things, perhaps questions we're seeing a lot that we think that we're helping users individually, but then that definitely would benefit the larger community. You can bring your questions, a chance for us to provide important updates. For example, WordPress or different plugins, they're continually updating the platform. And so that will be, this is a good opportunity for us to kind of really broadly communicate some of those updates that are coming. And then even an opportunity to highlight interesting sites or web projects that are happening. Again, we've got 275 plus sites, and everyone's doing a lot of cool things on their sites. So even an opportunity to share some of that, across the community of what people are doing. And so that's kind of what we're thinking for this. And with that, I'll hand the things over to Al.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, I think that is, the big one, especially as you mentioned at the end there, just knowing we want this to be valuable for folks. So it's sort of a question of, what works best in terms of getting updates and news and that sort of thing. We want to include an opportunity for answering some questions sort of, en masse if we can, especially if we get them really commonly. So that's part of this goal here. We have a bunch of current improvements that we've been working through and are implemented at this point. So a number of which include background topics that we've worked with our WhiskWeb partners and a few things on to make improvements to effectively both the editing experience and the front end experience. So that's a big update that happened there. And then a lot of it, as well as we've been continuing to improve the editor compatibilities and content features. I don't think a lot of people know this, but we tend to do that on a roughly weekly basis. A lot of it is requests that have come in from either administration or other units that have said, hey, I'd really like to be able to do X. And a lot of times we look at it and say, well, how can we make this a feature that everybody could potentially use if they really wanted to? And then we'll make it flexible and modular and try to put it into the theme so just everybody has it. And the big thing about that is that that's all well and good, but no one really knows about them, right? Except for the folks that maybe requested it. So a lot of this is going to be starting to also look at how we can better promote those sort of things and mention, hey, did you know you could do this, right? And that sort of thing coming up. So other things coming soon is, again, as Mark mentioned, is going to be some updates to documentation and self-help improvements. We want to create more and new flexible content editing options, which we'll get into in just a minute. So I'll leave that for a second. And then, especially a part of that is going to be how can we make things just quicker and snappier to get people going. I think one of the fun things about reaching out to different people as you get the different reactions. People have they wear so many hats, right? And how many things they're doing besides dealing with maybe their website, and they're trying to get that done, get that out of the way. I remember getting, depending on who I've talked to, asking them to look at their website more than once every 6 months was sort of a groan, So, for those that are active on their site, we really appreciate that. That is fantastic. But we're trying to continue to make better opportunities for that to be an easier thing for everyone to do really well for those that maybe don't have as much time. So with that, what I'll do is I want to kind of jump into a little bit of sort of the actual demo today in terms of look at what we're doing with the new editor. This is a little bit of a sneak peek, but a lot of these are things that you can start to do today. And they are available today. So for those that are curious and want to check this out right away afterwards, they're welcome to do so. But with that, let me showcase a little bit of that, and we can talk about what that really means and what we're doing with it. So with that, let me see what I can do here. First of all, is this visible to everybody? I don't know if this is too zoomed out at all.
It's a little tiny.
Visible,
Oh, there we
yeah,
go.
yeah,
A little
that
tiny.
helps,
Let me
yeah.
try to see if I can
Yeah.
make some more room here. So I want to make sure this is visible for everybody. Fantastic. So before I do this, is going to be, we'll spend like maybe 10, 15 minutes on this or so, and then we'll see kind of where we are for time and if there's any questions, and take it from there. So with that, just to kind of give a really quick overview. So for those that have been dealing with WordPress a very long time, it's probably worth kind of giving just a little bit of that path as to where things are going and why they're going there, and what we're doing with it. So the big one here is that when you look at WordPress as it's been for a very long time prior to today, is you may have been used to seeing something like this, which is your, kind of almost classic editor, as WordPress tends to call it, but it's just a title and an area of text, right? And that's really what a lot of people got used to over time. And I've seen some editors do some amazing things just trying to, even within the confines of what you can do here, right? And to that end, it did a lot at the time. And throughout the years, as we started to see obviously greater demand for people to be able to do more complicated layouts and do some more interesting content, multimedia, things sort of continue to evolve here. And for many of you, you may have seen kind of at the bottom here, this piece that says advanced formatting. And this has been a component that we built a number of years ago that basically made it such that it would basically take on replacing whatever you may have put in this content area and done it with a much more, a little bit more dynamic sort of block building sort of mechanism. And it was sort of our own DIY attempt at this, right? This is what let you do things like multiple columns, and within those multiple columns, choose different types more than text, right? So doing an accordion panel or showing the list of events from today.wist.edu. And this has been very successful overall. We've seen with people that really wanted to be able to do more. This has been a huge hit for that, and it's really been helpful. And what we've been trying to do throughout everything we've done is we eliminated a part of putting this in. We eliminated our custom coding we were doing. We were trying to make it that everything that someone would request to do on a site visually, we were doing in some capacity in this editor. And if it wasn't able to do it, we would add it. And that would be a lot of where these requests came from. This is how things grew over time. However, as much as this is great, and I'm very proud of where this went, it does have a lot of other problems. And a couple of those stem from how it can handle certain things in the interface here. Things you would do often, for example, are somewhat abstract, right? You want to add a button, you get this sort of form array where you have to choose between, what the label is going to be and where it's going to go, rather than actually seeing a real button, right? If you had a button over here and you suddenly realize I want it on the right side, not the left side, you can't really drag it over here. It doesn't let you do that. There was only sort of dragging up and down. There's a variety of things like that we sort of looked at and thought, okay, this would be great to address someday, right? This would be a nice thing to do. And that all being said, one of the things that has taken place throughout the general WordPress community in the world was WordPress finally releasing a newer editor. And for those who follow this stuff really closely, you might recognize the sort of code word they gave it, which was Gutenberg. But basically it is what other people tend to sometimes refer to as a block editor. It is basically just effectively a sort of a version of this. And what's really great about that being supplied by the larger community is that it lets us utilize something that more people will understand if they especially come from outside campus and they come in, they start to want to be able to work on a site. It also means we get to leverage a lot of that amazing expertise and brainpower from out in the general web community for those that make enhancements and updates to it to do more important and bigger things with it. And it reduces the amount of load that Mark and I, for example, are doing in terms of producing some of these pieces, right? Like this, pieces that are general, like just headings or buttons. We can offload some of that to what Core is bringing, and we can start to actually just work on the very specialty things, right? So if someone is looking for an opportunity to display information from today.wist.edu, we can make that module. Or if they're looking to display information from the KB, that's something we can do as well. If there's other areas of campus, I know that Guide is one of the ones we're working on right now. So For those that are interested to be able to potentially display information from Guide, that is something we're looking into and figuring out a model for that that'll work. All of those are pieces that then we can focus more of our time on and get kind of produced a lot more quickly. So if you've looked at the classic editor before, one thing that it will strike you if you have a newer site or if you've elected to turn this on is that it changes from looking a little like this to looking like this. And this, I will say, as much as it has a lot of potential, can be a little jarring, right? This can be somewhat new and different, and it has some caveats to it. Now, there's some things that we've been doing to make it a little bit easier to approach from its sort of vanilla state, I suppose, as it comes from WordPress. But there are I think there's a lot of room still to improve that. And that's something we're going to continue to work on as time goes on. So what we've built so far for you today to show you are things that are available today right now on any of the sites that you may have. And these are components that you can start to work with. So for those of you that may not have yet utilized Gutenberg before, this is something that we can begin to enable. If you'd like to today, reach out to us, let us know. We're happy to help get that enabled for you. We're going to start making sure that people start to move forward this editor over time, but we're kind of giving these early periods lots of breathing room for people to work on things. The last thing we want to do is sort of just randomly flip a switch on everybody and then say, hey, here, figure it out, right? So this is one where we're continuing to want to work with folks as we do this sort of thing. You know, text content, as you would have written it potentially in this old classic editor, will come over immediately. Any content that you would have included in this editor, we will need to help you bring over, right? So that won't be coming over automatically. There's a couple of things I want to highlight though, as we talk about this, because I know that sometimes saying, hey, we're about to change things on you can sound a little bit jarring, sometimes a little bit frustrating or scary too. The main thing is that the editor that included all of the different page builders that you may have used before, that isn't going anywhere for a while, and by a long while, because we need to make sure that people are well acquainted with the new editor. We need to make sure we have full compatibility with everything moving forward. So even as time moves on, this editor will still remain for now for a long time, because that's going to mean that everybody has the opportunity to sort of activate the new editor and use it when you feel you're comfortable with it, and use this editor when you're not. So the idea being is that as we move forward with this will be something where we want everyone to feel like they can get into this at their own speed. If you brought over a piece of content that came from the classic editor, it kind of will look a little like this sample page here. It'll automatically convert chunks of text into sort of these groups, right? So a paragraph will look like this. If I were to hit return as if I'm going to type more text, it just makes another paragraph. And this, in many ways, can somewhat feel like that main text editor. But you'll start to see as you maybe mouse over things that they're sort of, again, they're sort of grouped in this way. And when you group them, you can drag them around. You know, you can use the arrows to move them around as well. But effectively, this piece right here, you know, you can still more or less treat like a text editor. However, this is where things get a lot more powerful pretty quickly. So as we look at something like a sample page, you know, you'll notice that this little black plus button is shown up here. And this plus button, by the way, is matched with the same capability up here in this little blue plus button. It's the same thing. A number of things that are going to happen here as we move forward with moving this new editor over is going to be all of the different options that you will get under this plus. This plus is sort of like the same version of adding content down here. And it brings in not only anything that we have built within CALS, it'll bring in pieces that are included with WordPress itself. So in a normal situation here, you're going to include some of the more basic things you're probably accustomed to seeing: headings, quotes, lists, that sort of thing. You're going to include, you know, images, galleries, you know, things that I think a lot of you have included already on sites before. And then there's going to be a few new elements: media and text, video, cover images, and that sort of thing. And we can go over that a little bit. There even gets into design. So, you know, one of the biggest things that was of demand when we started seeing more people use block editors in general in the community, and we started putting something like the older advanced formatting out there, was the need to do multiple columns. And that is still accommodated within Gutenberg, and they have their own section for columns as well. So for example, if I go up here and I go and add columns, I can see that I'm now given some basic selections that you can still continue to adjust after the fact. But I could choose something like 2 columns, and then I have my spaces here to add more information, right? I could add a paragraph. And over here, maybe I could add something like a heading. And of course, unlike before, we've already gained a little bit more capability based on what we inherit from WordPress itself. So dragging things back and forth is now fully available, as well as a lot more content options available to us as well. So this is where things start to get really, really interesting. So as we look through this, this whole list of items can be incredibly daunting, I'd say. I think at first, especially, it felt for me that way. You know, as you look through everything you can potentially do here, there's a lot of available options. And a number of these options, ones that we feel like are maybe too redundant, we're going to help reduce and remove so there's a little bit less clutter. But this is where we're expecting, you know, a lot of people to look at this and probably, you know, be interested to potentially play with it at some point, but look at it and go, okay, this is too much for me maybe right now. And this is why we want to sort of reach out more and work with folks as they try to produce content and that sort of thing. For those of you that are really active, and I know from some of you I see in the participants list are really active, you might look at this and go, yes, I'm gonna dive into this. I'm gonna see what I can do with this and see where I find my limitations are. And as you do that, that's great. If you run into things that aren't working for you, and you just like, I know what I want to produce, I can't do it here, you know, let us know. I mean, we're going to be making continued modifications and adjustments to this to make that work for you. So let us know as you do this, and we're going to continue to help you out as that goes. For those that are looking at this and saying, well, this is great, but this looks like it's not really saving me any time over what I was doing before. That is the second part of what we'll be getting into here. And I want to showcase that a little bit as well. I realize I think I have it set up on additional tabs. So let me just swap this over here. Actually, I realize I have to rezoom in, sorry. All right. So one of the things that we're particularly excited about with this is that it's going to introduce the option for providing some potential guidance on these layouts and things that folks can do. So case in point, when you open up blocks, is the blocks that you'll have deployed. The training page I have is completely blank. All the sites within CALS now include additional blocks that we have produced, which include pulling things like remote WordPress content from other sites. You know, if you're used to on CALS News, seeing some of the eCALS posts, that's just a block that you can just drop in and use the same way you've used before. Likewise, doing accordion panels. Again, something that we've produced here is supported in-house and lets you do that same sort of accordion functionality you may have wanted to do before. One of the things that I think it's really interesting about this, though, is this little tab you might have seen here as I open this called patterns. And patterns are really, really powerful because what it means is that if you're looking, especially as we start to see people develop new sites, the biggest hurdle we see is you get that blank canvas effect, right? You kind of like, I know I need a page here. I need to have something that displays, talks all about what this particular group is about. I don't have a good way to do that. You know, this is something where we could potentially supply pre-supplied layouts, not only of just little pieces of content. So on the one hand, we could say, what's a way to highlight a person? And by clicking this person pattern, I get an entire chunk here that's already lined up here with a heading, places for imagery, a nice option for a title, recommendations for buttons. But we could also go further with this, right? So we're planning on having both a combination of pieces of content that you can just add in various components, various sort of chunks, if you will, as well as entire pages. So you could come in here and decide, I want an entire page, recommended page, that includes all of the content that I might want in this, including a cover image, all the way through a sidebar, maybe some highlights of where we're going with you know, CALS or our organization in general, contact us information, and connections to even your own forms. So all of this is something that can be done. I added this with one click, right? And not only is this something that you can do and see, but you can then continue to modify it, right? So if it doesn't quite have the way you want it to look, you know, this is great, but I don't need this call to action button here. You can remove it. I can go to any one of these modules and actually just, you know, remove this here. If my wasn't magnified quite so much, I could see it. But yeah, so there we go. So if I can remove that, there we go. So these are components that you can continue to adjust. And you know, this is sort of where we're starting to go with these things. We're very early in the stage of making patterns. We're still working on a bunch of these as we go through them. But this will be something you'll continue to see more and more of. And especially if you find yourself looking for potential recommendations on how to do maybe a certain layout or do a certain piece of content, this is a good place to go. And we'll see, hopefully we'll see these develop and in a way that people find very, very useful. So one thing to keep in mind as well that I also really appreciate that, again, some of you probably dealt with on our other editor, maybe you've had some frustrations with this, is that when you've made changes to things and then you've needed to go back and be like, oh, I need to undo what I did. Edit undo actually now functions. So I know that sounds like a big deal, right? But the fact that you can come back now and finally say, okay, I just need to back up a couple steps, whether you use the hotkeys, Control Z or Command Z or the arrows here, you can step through all the changes you made very, very quickly back and forth and easily redo what you had. I think that's, again, another just sort of quality of life improvement that's going to be hopefully really nice for people that are working on their sites. So that sort of gives a great issue of patterns. And I think that patterns are going to be incredibly powerful as we continue to develop these. So if you look through, looking through some of these patterns as we start to develop these, we're going to be working on preview images for each of these, so they're much easier to see as you go. But being able to go through these and then, make changes and see what they can do is going to be, I think, really, really powerful. One thing that I know that a lot of the really editors that I think it's amazing. It was sort of amazing just in our statistics from that survey. Really, a lot of people really care a lot more about accessibility and are aware of accessibility more than I was expecting, which is great. We're definitely really huge advocates for trying to improve that web accessibility. And one of the things that I know that people that start to dive into this start to wonder about is well, what, is this going to change how that works? And I think it does so in a couple of pretty nice measurable ways. Number one is we do provide in all these patterns and all these blocks, I think, sensible defaults, which is going to be hopefully ways that help put the web content in a way that is the best structure for things like headings and recommended alt tags in the right place that we can do that. However, it's still going to, of course, be up to you as content editors to work through making this stuff really, really work well. The other part of this is that we're trying to gain and garner more flexibility for all of the editors out there. So what do I mean by this? The big thing is that, for example, especially, and I feel like there's a bunch of you that are going to recognize this right off the bat, is if you were working with a piece of content, particularly just like a heading, and you wanted it to sort of look a certain way, like you defaulted it to something, you found that your kind of only choices were to change the heading level, right? In WordPress, it was sort of classy. You just sort of pick it's an H2, is an H3, is an H4. And at best, it gave you a little bit of a different look. And sometimes you were felt with this awful choice with, I'm picking a different heading level just because I like the way it looks at the content. It's more readable. It feels better from a visual hierarchy standpoint, but it didn't match what you knew was going to be the right heading structure semantically or from an accessible standpoint. So now we're separating those components. So the idea is that there'll be sensible heading levels applied to each. You can still adjust those as you need to, but changing things like typography, changing a little bit of its font size to a certain degree, all of that can be handled, and it's independent of the actual heading level assignment. So again, we try to give you best defaults and then try to give you some wiggle room there to sort of adjust things as you need it to. So one of the things that we'll continue to work with a lot of people on is figuring out what is the best sort of middle ground option for providing these options and this flexibility, while making sure that we maintain the level of accessibility scoring that we strive for with all the CALS sites in particular. I'll give you, a great example is, if I'm looking through, doing something like, a piece of text or a heading, and I make this heading and it says, whatever it might say. And let's say I go to just the color, which, by the way, the color palette of UW is now integrated directly into the theme. So that's a new thing that was added just recently as well. That is going to be something, for example, where if you picked white text on a white background, obviously not a great idea, right? So you get a little warning here saying, hey, this is not a good suggestion. But more so, if we start to see, for the most extreme examples where you do pick a white text on white background, it won't actually take effect. When you go to apply and publish the content, that is a level of breaking accessibility that we will override and make the text black or dark gray again anyway. So there's some certain pieces there that I think it's important to note, that if you try to make a really, I would say, probably not a great choice for content, gray on gray, right? This is where things will get overwritten automatically and we'll still end up with legible text. Excuse me. So there are a number of different options and things here that we could go over, and I don't want to necessarily go too deep into this. This is already getting quite large, and there's a lot more that we have available to us. So I'll just cover a couple of quick more, and then I want to just sort of talk about a couple other minor updates in general to all CALS sites that were received in the last week that were pushed out to all sites, and then I'd love to wrap up and see what sort of thoughts or questions you guys have. See if this is sounding good or is sounding horrible. I don't know one way or the other, but one way we could look at this as well is a couple other things I want to sort of hide that they're sort of hidden options. But for those that are building pages and potentially interested in starting to use right away, you might find this incredibly appealing. If you look at something like, applying a particular set of multiple columns or maybe a sidebar sort of layout. So I will just make heading 1, and we'll do something maybe in the other column as well. One of the things you can do is that within particular columns and groups, we're going to start to include full group section heading styles, full group styles as well. So for example, you can go to a column or group and give it a group style. So things like the sort of UW brand centric white box with the red underline, right? That is something that you can do at a column style. So applying that in this way, again, independent of your grouping, and it doesn't require you to go up into sort of the old style, which we have down in this editor, where you'd pick like a drop down, choose a listed labeled style that you don't really know what it looks like, and then just hit publish and hope, right? Or hit update and hope. Again, all of that is much better now. You're going to hopefully see what you're going to look like for the most part right here and now. And on top of that, your preview option will work much more consistently. So all of that to being said is there's a lot of things you can do in here. And I do understand that a lot of this can be a little bit overwhelming. This is going to be something that I think we're going to have to continue to grow over time as we develop it and try to make things better. Things that we've added recently include giving these outlines and these hover states. And this is something we're looking at more. A good friend of ours, Jason Lemieux, who's here, was just highlighting a plugin to me the other day that actually does a stupendous job of this. So who knows, we may adopt that over this depending on how it works well, but finding ways that make this work better for everyone is going to be a big part of that. So that is where we are at with an updated editor, and I'd love to see what everyone thinks of this as we get into this. Hopefully as we move things along, this will make things a lot easier and more flexible and more accommodating to every type of content editor we have out there, and we'll have to see what we have to do to help make that work and work better. So before I guess we get to sorry, go ahead, Mark.
I was gonna say, yeah, we've got some good questions in the chat. So whenever you're ready to maybe start, I know you can't see right? because you're screen
I know,
sharing,
sorry.
So
yeah. Let's do some of those, and then if there's more time, I'll cover some of the other general updates. So
yeah, so let's see. I'll just start from the top here. So Anne asked, they're using the UW. They have a child theme of the UW theme, and she said they're not seeing the editor. Or she was looking and she's not seeing that. So yeah, I'll let you answer, but.
Yeah, no, that's a fantastic question. So, and my apologies for assuming everyone's using the CALS theme right off the bat. So this is a great one to sort of just highlight real quick, because there are a few folks that are using UW theme. One of the things that we do support within the CALS platform here is both the UW theme as well as the CALS theme. And there are a few folks that have very specific to their units, some customized third-party themes. Predominantly though, most people are on the CALS theme, and then there's a couple of folks using the UW theme that's created and maintained by both University Marketing and WhiskWeb. That particular theme is a fantastic theme as well. It is a wonderful tool to be able to use. It is, however, something that we don't develop in-house here. So a lot of the customizations and options that we receive as requests from folks in CALS, there's a little bit less of an opportunity there. We do have a strong relationship with them. So a lot of times when we hear about these things, we pass them along, and we want to make sure that those potentially have an option for them to be developed in that space as well. But if you're using the UW theme in some capacity or a child theme of the UW theme, those updates come as inherited based on what they developed there. So what that means is there's a couple of ways that we're looking into this. So, and is this Anne from GHI, I suppose, Anne Graval?
Yes.
So I think one of the things, and especially as it pertains to GHI, is your site, I think, has an opportunity potentially to utilize, some of these features as well. If, one of the things I'll be looking at with what GHI has is whether or not we can help this editor become an added option in those particular cases. That's something we don't have available right now, I'll say that, but we are looking into that. One of the key aspects that if you're looking at what you have today and you're interested in where this is going, I'll sort of just highlight where a lot of the general sort of developer community is going, and it helps maybe inform the way you think about your site and what you decide you'd really like to do with it. The big one is that, we meet monthly with the Whisk Web team directly with our SL2 partners meetings, and we talk about all the feedback and information that we get from all of you, and where we have feedback that pertains specifically, of course, to what they produce within Whisk Web. And that's a really good receptive meeting to do that. And they do take some of those considerations into work on that. I know that things like this Gutenberg editor, this new editor here that we showcased, is something that they are considering. They, for good and for bad, have a very large, I'd say, for metaphor, have a very large ship to steer. They have a bit over, I think, 1,200 sites right now. So because they're much more of a general service to campus, which means any campus unit that doesn't have its own web developer team or web group in some way, basically are very reliant on that. So in many ways, a lot of what they'll do is they'll take things a lot slower because they need to make sure that those 1,000 sites are okay with that. So, but I know that they are always very open and receptive to that. I know that a lot of groups on campus, extension, the libraries, school business, I know are all starting to adopt the Gutenberg platform in many ways, and at least in some of their own ways. And I think what's really important about that I really appreciate is that it means that in the same way that we're producing some of these specific CALS-based blocks and components and patterns, we're making those as shareable modules with all of the campus. So if there was ever a unit that had to move based on its organizational change, they wouldn't be completely stuck without their content. They'd be able to move back and forth. And that's what we're working with all those other units with as well, to hopefully do that. The hope is that things should be less technically frustrating, I should say, if that's a better way to put it. I don't. Hopefully that helps answer your question, Anne. I know if you're continuing interested in trying to move things forward editor-wise, reach out to us some more. We'll work with you and figure out what might be a good option there.
Let's see. Nicole had a good question. Actually, Nicole had a couple of good questions. So she had a question in particular to the eCal site. I'll just read it. So given that they have lots of like thousands of past posts, and then sort of the worrying about would the old posts get messed up with a transition to the Gutenberg editor.
Great. Yeah. Fantastic question. So in our experience, thankfully, that has not been a problem to take legacy content. One of the things that has both received some negative and positive feedback, depending on how you look at it, from the developer community, has been that in the way that this new editor works is it doesn't actually change the structure of the way WordPress publishes and saves to its database. So what that basically means is that it saves content in the exact same way now as it did even back in sort of the early days of WordPress. So if you were to take something like eCals and then activate the Gutenberg editor and then go to a particular page, the question is like, well, what happens, right? So number one, with a lot of that legacy content, there's actually a block that it'll use by default. It's called the classic block, which sounds, of course, very similar to what you might expect. And what it would do is it basically puts a block that looks a little like this, right? Looks kind of like that heading bar from that original editor. And so it keeps this space there and it just leaves the content exactly the way it is, right? Now, if you did something like that, let's say you took a bunch of content from the classic editor. If I, type my content here and say, let's say you also had a list and list of content, obviously I know a lot of those eCals articles will do a lot more with this sort of thing. So we can definitely do some tests within a sandbox space and see how those are handled. But the nice thing about that is that you can then say something like convert to blocks if you ever were ready to move that one particular post to the new editor. This button will always be there, and it converts it in this way. So you can see it converted the paragraph to a paragraph block and the list to a list block, and it does so reasonably well, right? The nice thing is that it doesn't do it sort of en masse. So when we activate like a new editor like this, it doesn't go back and change a bunch of those posts at all. It leaves them exactly the same place in the content. What happens is if you went to then look at that post in the editor, you would see it in that classic block I just showed with an option to convert to blocks, but again, does not do that for you on your behalf unless you choose to. So that's the good news, is that moving forward, this shouldn't break any of that old content.
Another question. So also a nice mention that it does look very powerful. So that people seem to be appreciating the new enhancements to the new editor.
Yeah, I will say it's also can be very because of the power. It can be a little bit. I think the learning curve is a lot steeper, and that's what we're hopefully going to help with a combination of training opportunities and improvements to the way the editor works for sure.
And the next question, Nicole, I might need a little help clarifying, but she asked if she could talk about the gallery option. I think maybe she's referring to one of the gallery block, perhaps.
Sure.
And what does that do to display multiple photos, or what does that look like on the front end? So maybe just talk a little bit about the gallery block.
Absolutely. Yeah, Nicole, please feel free to elaborate if you have some additional thoughts on this one. The gallery block, in the way that it works, in many ways is similar. The way it outputs what it does is very similar to the way the current WordPress gallery does what it does. So for those that are familiar with the classic editor, if you did something like add media, you would also do an option here where you could create a gallery. And from in that space, you could then select a series of images and display them. And what the output of that usually in the front end was, again, it would be particular to the theme, but it often was displayed as sort of a grid of photos as thumbnails, which then you could click and get maybe a light box for, or just a larger image for. And that is much the same way it does here. So when you use the gallery block, it puts it in this space, and you could choose a series of images. Again, these are not ones you'll see on cals.wisc. I put these up here for fun either way. You could have gallery captions, and this is much of what it looks like. If I actually go to the front end, whoops, I'll just view the page here. So in this case, it actually put them as large thumbnails. The more we had in there, the smaller they would get. This particular instance of gallery is one that we want to continue to advance and work on to make that work a little bit better. I think that's something that we would like to do. Something like the lightbox mark you produced for MSABD would be a wonderful one to add in here, so that that's supported by default. But basically, you could still move them around and arrange them. One of the things I do like here is that, and I there's so much to look at here, so I'm trying not to go too far into detail. I think we're going to have to have future discussions where we showcase how a lot more of this works, probably in specific blocks, just do deep dives on specific content pieces in detail. Is you could choose the number of columns. So if I had more than just 2 images here, I would have multiple column selections. So I could go to 3 or 4 or 5 columns, which changes the size of things. You could choose whether or not the images get cropped automatically, and things like this. You could choose the overall default image size. There's a lot of options that you get when you start to utilize some of these blocks that maybe weren't available at all before, if you recall from the older gallery block or the old gallery insert sort of option. And that's, again, another component to trying to make this a lot more, flexible and workable for everybody. Mark, there's one that stands out to me that I really would love to show too, that I think, honestly, I know has been a long-standing request from various folks, especially in external relations, and I completely get why they've been looking for it. And I think it'd be wonderful to just sort of highlight it briefly.
Absolutely.
I'll just throw on a pattern real quick. So, if we're looking at something like this particular sort of space here, one of the things that we also did is we made it so that major chunks of content, you could choose whether you'd like it to follow the normal max width, right? The default way that sort of things fit, which is just sort of fitting along the same sort of left and right cropped sort of, left and right sort of width that things always get. Or you could pop something out, give it a wide width, or go all the way out to a full width, which is just 100%, right? And one of the things that has always been a bit of a pain point, especially not only with being able to do that whenever you want, which now you can, but on top of that was, well, I put an image in the background or I put an image there, and now it's like really difficult to make sure that if it's a person with like a portrait, that you see the person and not their chin, right? You don't want to like to crop them off. Well, guess what? Now there's actually a focal point selection tool. So now within here, I can choose and drag where I want the focal point to be for any particular given image assigned. So there's a much greater available set of options as you're doing some of these layouts, to not just be stuck with the programmatic crop that you're getting by default, which was, by the way, often usually just smack dab in the middle, right? So that's one there as well. So there's a whole host of additional options, ways to display these in different ways, or ways we're adding a bunch of these as we go. So additional options are coming. But these are already a bunch of ways that I know have been in, again, long in the tooth sort of requests that are becoming available now. Any other thoughts or questions with that so far? I don't know if there's anything else that's cropped up. So
No additional questions so far in the chat, but yeah, if anyone has a question, we're kind of into the Q&A as well. So please feel invited to open up your mic, ask a question. Again, if you may think your question is very particular to your site, but believe me, your question is broadly applicable often. So yeah, please feel invited to ask any other questions. And they don't have, at this point too, they don't have to be particular to the block editor. If you have any other broader questions, please ask those.
We'll definitely include that as well. And well, if anyone's thinking of any questions they may have, I'll just also mention things that we've also added in the last week, and we want to just highlight these out. We wanted to make sure there was an opportunity for making sure mention pronouns if you want as an optional field within the directory, as well as office schedule for a lot of those on hybrid schedules now. That is also featured and available. And when you go now to also output your directory onto any given page, you can now choose which fields show up in the full list view. So you can decide whether or not you want the list view to show pronouns or show their office schedule, or in what order you want them to lay them out. So those are new additions that came just last week. So
cool.
Fantastic. So if there's no other questions, I don't know if there'll be more. I'll give people a few more minutes, but
yeah,
there's a lot more that we'd love to I mean, this is sort of just like a tipping a toe in the water kind of thing of all the things you can do in the new editor, and a lot more things that are continuing to be developed right now. So I would especially encourage you, if you have a chance to look at this or are interested to try to get into this or have some more questions, to definitely reach out. I know Mark and I would really like to know too if this was at all helpful, just to get a general update, to know. I mean, I'm sure many people didn't know that we added this to the directory, for example, and I understand why that would be something that would be nice to know about. We're going to do more to try to also publish this through the email communications that we have that go specifically out to editors and admins. And if there's additional ways that you'd like to see some of that communicated, please let us know. That'd be great. With that, I also want to be conscious of time. I'm finally looking at the clock, so we have about 3 minutes left. So hopefully, yeah, hopefully we're able to answer everyone's questions. And again, if there are more, let us know and give us any feedback. We are going to hopefully kind of evolve this over time and see if we can make this even more useful for everybody.
Looks great. Thanks, you guys.
Thanks.
I'll let you know when I get in there and I have all the questions.
Yes. And
awesome.
For sure. And if any of you go in there and you still see like the older classic editor, it's probably because at the time it was, we checked the box to leave it at that space for now. But if you're ready for things to start to move, that's something we can definitely help with anytime. So, and there's thankfully, again, I think Nicole's question was very apt. No breaking changes. So that's the good news. So you shouldn't have to worry about anything suddenly changing your site radically. So, but with that, I guess we'll adjourn for now. And I thank everyone for joining. I really appreciate it. This is sort of, again, a new thing for us to try. And I hope this is useful. So Thanks again, everybody, and I hope you guys have a good afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.